Well, it's great to see you all, and I'm so happy that you have decided to join us for a conversation that will have far-reaching implications for the thinkers that we will continue to pursue for the rest of the semester, and indeed beyond. Spinoza is an enigmatic figure, but that doesn't keep him from being, in fact, profoundly influential. He is the hidden magus of the Enlightenment, of the radical Enlightenment, and we can trace the influence he will have on Hegel and the idealist tradition in general, and therefore even the romantic reaction to the Enlightenment. So this man covers a lot of territory. He is a metaphysically driven thinker. He is, as Novalis called him, a God-intoxicated man, though in fact in his time he was charged with atheism, and that's one of the discussions we want to have. What does it mean to be an atheist? Does this actually apply to Spinoza? He was born in 1632 and he lived until 1677. He was born Baruch Spinoza. He was of the Converso community in the Netherlands. They had been Spanish, Portuguese Jews who had been forced under the Portuguese Inquisition to convert. But of course, forced conversions don't make any sense. And in fact, they had been able to maintain as a community Jewish devotion. When the Treaty of Utrecht when the Union of Utrecht was announced in 1579, there was a decree of toleration that was put forward. So I mentioned this last time, the Dutch Republic was the first great republic to emerge in Western Europe, preceding the English Glorious Revolution and so on. The 7 northern provinces of Holland had revolted against the Spanish tyranny especially because they wanted to secure breathing room for the Reformed churches, especially Calvinism. They wanted a chance to live free in their faith. And under the principles of their origin, they were committed to religious toleration. That was not to endure. They, in fact, basically established Calvinism in 1619 with the Synod of Dort. But that ideal was there alive in the Dutch nation, that they would be a secular, tolerant republic. And that ideal drew the Converso community from the Iberian Peninsula, and they came to Amsterdam, and it was from this community that Spinoza emerged. He was taught in the yeshiva there. He was taught and given the good rabbinic education. And this is important as background, because even though his main interlocutors will be later Descartes especially, and the modern philosophers that he was so excited by, in the background is the great tradition of Jewish and Arabic medieval philosophy, especially Maimonides and Avicenna and so on. All of these thinkers, and therefore the scholastics of Western Europe, would have been that whole milieu, and above all Aristotle. So here, one of the great oddities of Spinoza is that he was committed to the modern project, Republican project, but unlike Bacon, unlike Hobbes, he did not dismiss Aristotle. In fact, this work, The Ethics, is a profound revitalization of some basic Aristotelian emphases. This has to do partly, I think, with his coming from the Cartesian tradition, from the thinking of Descartes, because Francis Bacon, of course, championed the inductive method, where you had try to gather as much data as possible and then try to form more general observations on that basis. Whereas, of course, the deductive method, which was the main method of the medievals, was not discarded by Descartes, who wanted, in fact, to proceed by way of clear and distinct ideas, to have a system of thought that could not in any way be doubted. So you have, on the one hand, the scientific revolution's basis in the inductive and always probabilist and fallibilist stance, where any scientific theory is in principle surpassable by another theory that could account for more data. That is there, of course, essential to the science that we know, but that is combined, in fact, in our world with the deductive mathematical procedures of Descartes, who always is pointing us to the mathematical, and especially the geometric. And in fact, Descartes, of course, does this profound thing of translating geometry into algebra with his, as we know, with the Cartesian system. So these Cartesian ways of coming at the new and exciting scientific thought were the first basis for Spinoza's engagement. And so that's why in this work, The Ethics, which was the culmination of about 15 years of philosophical exploration on Spinoza's part, and it is indeed his masterwork, it is done in a strictly geometric method. It is meant to provide axioms and definitions, and then to proceed stepwise by tight logical deduction to various interesting conclusions. It's an odd work because, of course, it doesn't sit well with things that are not numerical, mathematical realities, but it does have, of course, very great power because of its seeming airtight logic. So that's a very important aspect of the ambition that motivates Spinoza, that he is not going to get rid of Aristotle, but he is fully modern. So this is a very interesting position that he maintains. He's very rationalist. Descartes himself, who lived from 1596 to 1650, so younger by a couple decades, well, actually, almost 4 decades older than Spinoza. He had ended up in Amsterdam himself because it was such a place of free thinking. So this milieu in the Dutch Republic, this great commercial power that was rising in Western Europe, drew great minds. But there was an internal struggle in the Dutch Republic between those forces that wanted to establish Calvinist thought and the constant recalling of the great ideal of religious toleration of Utrecht. And this would symbolize in the great Grand Pensionary Johan de Witt, who was unfortunately in the end barbarously killed by a mob. But he was a friend of Spinoza's, and Spinoza held to that secular republican ideal. If we turn to the thoughts behind the Ethics, you have this one great thought, which we know from the history of philosophy, we would name it Parmenidean, right? This monist commitment to one substance. And then the question is, how can we account for the experiences that we have? What Spinoza is giving us is what later thinkers would describe as panentheism, which is not quite the same as pantheism, which is simply to equate the God and the world. Because in fact, God or nature, which is what Spinoza does say, there is a kind of equation, but still God is somehow more than this world system. So, but he's not apart from the world system. And that's something we'll see very, very clearly in Hegel also. It's the same form of thought, panentheistic. So is that atheistic or not? There's one substance, because the notion of substance is that it must be that thing that is necessary. Going back to Aristotelian logic, that you have a subject and a predicate. Whenever I have David was full of black hair, and now David is half gray. That subject, David, has different accidents over time. Uh, Black hair, half black hair. So you've got a subject and you've got a predicate. That subject is the thing that survives changes. And so in our world of change, what is it that is there? And in the end, Spinoza is just overwhelmed by the thought that there is one thing ultimately that is there. That is God. This is the substance. And each of us, every other thing that we see is in fact a modification, a mode of that one substance. And that these modes that we are, that every other thing is, is both everything, including rocks all the way to humans, is both material and mental. So unlike Descartes, who has two substances, right? The thinking substance, the thinking thing, and the extended thing. And then you have all the problems of how to relate the mind and body. And in Spinoza, what you have is this account of everything is both mental and material. It's the same thing under two aspects. And it's all in each thing is being a mode of the one infinite necessary substance. And so that's a peculiar metaphysical system, but that's the one we've got here. And it gives us a whole new way to become at peace in a world full of change, in a world full of reverses, in a world full of heartache. And that's the point of a work that he would call ethics, even though this is a very metaphysical work. And this also is very modern, that he already, by the title of his work, is giving us a pivot to the modern privileging of the practical over the theoretical, right? This is the ethics. How do you live a life? And it's very stoic. This is definitely a new way of being stoic based on a novel metaphysical account. Now, the Greek and the medieval background and the Jewish thinking must all be kept in mind. Maimonides is there, the man who, of course, was the one really to make Aristotle such a going concern for the scholastics. He was the one who first tried to reconcile Aristotle and religious faith. That's in the background here. But Spinoza is going to be rational without feeling a need to be part of a religious community. His own Jewish community, in fact, found him to be an atheist and a heretic, and anathematized him, excommunicated him, put him under a harem ban. But he was okay with that. He continued to live his life as a lens grinder and just kept thinking. That's what he lived. And he didn't feel the need to become a Christian or to join some other group. He just felt, he felt this, you sense it in the work, right? There's this deep mystical experience that drives, I think, these metaphysical austerities that are before us. But he's always trying to get at how can we live our lives more happily, and that's of course the point of the great conversation is how should we live, and that's Spinoza's great concern. How do we live in the conditions of a secular society, in a growing commercial society, and this would set up in various ways the thinkers that would come after him, like Moses Mendelssohn too, in the Jewish stream of thought. So the 5 parts of the work, just to give us orientation, we have the last part. The first is on God. The second part is on the nature and origin of the mind. The third part is on the origin and nature of the emotions. So again, we're pivoting already into the ethical part, well into before the end. The third part's on human servitude, or the strength of the emotions, and then the part before us is on the power of the intellect, or human freedom. And I think that it might provide enough orientation. If we look at the questions, and I wrote them more with more explanation than usual, because I recognize that the work itself needs some orienting. Spinoza, question 1. Spinoza ends his ethics with his path to freedom, outlining a new kind of republican liberty for the bourgeois citizen of a kingdom of reason. What does a happy person look like on his account? How does he or she handle prosperity and adversity? How can there be freedom in a deterministic system? And it is a fully deterministic system. So there's a question. Number 2, for Spinoza, emotions are not the same as passions. What are the remedies for passion provided for by the power of reason? Number 3, Spinoza describes 3 different kinds of cognition, the third being what he calls intuitive, which, quote, proceeds from an adequate idea of certain attributes of God to an adequate cognition of the essence of things, unquote. How does this intuitive cognition relate to the practice of viewing things from the vantage of eternity? And Spinoza is well known for this phrase, sub specie aeternitatis. Oh, and I should note this. He wrote the work in Latin, and Roger Scruton, in his lovely little book on Spinoza, says that this is the last great masterwork written, philosophical masterwork written in Latin. So that's an interesting thought to keep in mind, that Spinoza really contains so much from the ancients all the way to hypermodern thought. And number 4, is Spinoza's God lovable? Is there any personal immortality in Spinoza? Is this a system of love with no lovers? This is a fully immanentistic system. There's no outside. It's all internal, right? There's one substance with all these various modes. So the question is, it's a system of radical interrelationship, so that can increase love, solidarity. But then the question is, how real are we, each of us as selves in this?